because we had breakfast together doesn't mean you can keep yakking when I start class.
Why weren't we invited to breakfast?
Nobody was invited. It was a random event.
I was not.
It was a random event. Yeah, Taylor and Sean were there with their wives, and I was there with my wife. And
Good times.
it was just such good times. You folks watching online, it was at a nice little restaurant called Amanouche. Am I saying that right, you think?
That's good. With the resident. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful place with Middle Eastern kind of food. It's, if you like the left bank of Paris, which I do, and you can get couscous, and you can get that at Amanouche. That's really good, and plus they have a really great breakfast menu. So there's information completely useless to you if you don't live around here, but I'll provide it to you anyway.
We have a very important question.
Oh, important question, yeah.
Follow up from yesterday.
Yes.
Confirmation. Tracy Hess's husband is John Wells.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Have you looked?
Just
We
now.
found him.
Just now, yeah.
Did you see what I'm seeing?
I can see it.
Can you kind of see it?
Big shape. Yeah. But you no.
Well, in the category of I don't know what good this is doing, it's everything though, isn't it? All right.
Thanks so much.
Where did you happen to see him?
Just online.
Oh, online. Okay. Let's see if I can get on track here.
That would be distracted.
Twice. I distracted myself once. I've referred a couple of times to a definition of an industry. And when I take the next step here in talking about market structure, I'm going to distinguish between what happens at the industry or market level and what happens at the individual or typical firm, company level. So I wanted to go back to the idea of industry, of an industry. And what I want to talk about, I'm going to just introduce you to the topic so you know it's out there, so when you need to use it, you'll know what to look for. I want to talk about the system of identification called the NAICS. It stands for the North American Industrial Classification System. It is a way of identifying, of categorizing companies and sectors of the economy by their industry. And it's a useful thing to kind of talk about, both because it's practical. There may well be times when you get out there in your career when you're going to be asked to look at a particular industry, and you would be asked to look at that industry through the lens of these NAICS classifications. Plus, it solidifies my idea that I want to convey to you of what it means to be an industry, what that encompasses. So I have here a little bit of a printout from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which will become relevant, by the way, when we talk about unemployment rates and the jobs report and stuff like that in the next half of the course. But for now, it's a place you can get some information on these NAICS codes. So I just want to give you some sense of what they mean. So it starts, it's very much a hierarchical kind of thing. So what they do is they identify a very broad set of industries, the broadest possible. And at this very broad definition, they assign 2 digits to the classification. So, for example, the sector called agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting, that's an industry. It has classification code 11. The industry called mining, quarrying, and oil and gas extraction has the industry code 21. Utilities 22, construction 23, manufacturing 31 through 33 because they divided into durable manufacturing, non-durable manufacturing, and some other kind of catch-all category. 42 is wholesale trade. 44 and 45 are retail trade. You start to see what's going on here. 48 and 49 are transportation and warehousing. 51 is information. I'm going to get back to information to kind of break down the detail a little bit more. It's 51. 52 is finance and insurance. 53 is real estate and rental and leasing. 54 is professional, scientific, and technical services. 55 is management of companies and enterprises, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26 major industry categories. Now what happens, and by the way, what I'm going to look at more is from a basic industry position or framework, they then progressively narrow down what the industry looks like. And as they narrow it down, they do so by adding digits to his classification. So information is 51. What goes into information is publishing industries. That's considered information when you publish a book. This is 51.1. Motion pictures and sound recording industries. 51.2. Broadcasting, except the internet. 51.5. So you see what's going on? And then what I could do is I could take my cursor, which I don't have with me, I could take my cursor and put it over the number, and it would blow it up to even more detailed sets of industries. To give you a sense of what this means, I used to work with when I worked at this major electric utility, the biggest customer we had was a couple of aluminum refining companies. Aluminum, when you hold an aluminum beer can in your hand, and by the way, I recommend it, you are basically holding solid electricity in your hand. Aluminum takes more power, more electric power to produce than any other metal, and really than any other thing. It's very energy intensive. Our biggest customer, there were some days when they were running at full steam, when this major power grid, they were using 40% of the electricity we generated, and just two aluminum smelting plants. So I was very interested in what's called primary metals, because aluminum sits in primary metals. So here's some breakdowns of primary metals. The primary metals is in manufacturing, so it's a 33. Primary metal manufacturing is 33.1. Iron and steel mills and ferroalloy manufacturing is 33.11. Iron and steel mills manufacturing, forget the ferroalloy part, is 33.1110. Now it now has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 digits. And 6 digits is the narrowest you can define an industry. Aluminum and aluminum production is 33.13. Secondary smelting and alloying of aluminum is 33.131.4. 6 digits. That's the most narrow definition. Notice that the narrower the definition, the more numbers apply. So in a way, it's somewhat counterintuitive, but not really. The broadest definition has the fewest digits. The most detailed definition within a broad definition has up to 6 digits. Blah, 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 blah. Let me go back a little bit. I mentioned retail trade in my listing of major industries. Let me just read to you what's included in retail trade. Retail trade is 44 and 45. That's the major industry code. Within retail trade are motor vehicles and parts dealers, furniture and home furnishing stores, electronics and appliance stores, building materials and garden equipment and suppliers and dealers, food and beverage stores. Let me halt there for a minute. When I go to IKEA, isn't that a big place? IKEA stores, they're really interesting to go into. They have a really nice restaurant. So, which is IKEA? Is it furniture or is it a restaurant? What they do, and this shows how measurement can be an issue, is they take the activity that accounts for at least 50% plus 1 of the activity. So IKEA, the restaurant part of IKEA's stores gets buried. You don't. There's nothing in the data that tells you that IKEA has a restaurant inside of it. It is fully categorized as a furniture store. Yes, ma'am.
What do you mean by 50% plus one? By
Well, if their revenues, revenues is 100%.
is it by revenue?
It's by revenue.
Okay.
It's by revenue. And so 50% of the revenue plus $1 or plus 1 penny. That's what they're categorized as. And by the way, that becomes a real issue when, stores, notice which of these things does Walmart not have? Motor vehicle parts. Yeah, I've seen some parts. I guess you call a battery a motor vehicle part. They have some furniture. They have some electronics. They have some garden equipment. The one on Route 9 has a food and beverage store and have a little Subway shop. So you see the problem with these big box stores is they do a bunch of different things and their classification is fraught. And in a way, by definition, inaccurate because they take, and by the way, if none of these things adds up to 50%, then they take the one that's largest. Is there another hand up? No.
You answered my question.
I did? Okay. Yes, sir.
So how would we apply this in like a professional setting?
Well, in a professional setting, you may well be asked, like let's say you're working in a merger and acquisition part of a finance company, that you're helping buyers or a company decide whether to merge or acquire. What you would be asked to do is you'd be asked to pull up industry studies. You'd be asked to say, okay, in what kind of industry, with what kind of prospects is the company we want to merge with or acquire, where do they sit? So what you would do is you would find out their NAICS classification number, and that is a magic number, because what you can do, and you can do it for free when you're on this campus, and even you online folks with UMass ID and password, you can access the online library where there are, it seems to me, almost an infinite number of what's called industry studies. And those industry studies are organized by their NAICS number. So, and I said a financial institution would be interested in having industry studies that were classified by NAICS codes. But I can envision, when we were where I used to work, we would do industry studies of our major customers. So we were always updating our industry study of the aluminum smelting industry. We had other, like the wood processing industry. I mentioned that as a company in that industry went off our grid because they started generating their own electricity. But we studied every industry that was important in our sales. And I assume you can study every industry that's important in your supply chain just the same way. So there are many occasions that I can envision where you want to study a particular industry, and the key to getting to the right industry information is finding out the NAICS code for the industry and then searching under that NAICS code. Okay? All right. So, anytime I refer to an industry, I want these NAICS codes to pop up in your mind. So let's get back to market structure. At some point in talking about how, where did it go? It's gone for at some point when we talk about how different market structures, remember market structure is a continuum. Where you have perfect competition down here, you've got monopoly down here, and you've got some intermediate categories here. As we move from this point along the continuum to this point, there are going to be very different dynamics that arise as companies experience profits in excess of what would be normal profits or opportunity costs, as the industry becomes more populated with other companies or becomes less populated if companies are earning losses. As that dynamic plays out, in terms of our abstract analysis of it, it's going to be very important that we identify costs and revenues. Remember, profits are equal to total revenues minus total cost. So we're going to always be comparing total costs and total revenues and see what happens when one exceeds the other in terms of the dynamic of the industry we're talking about. So I wanted to give you some details about how I'm going to measure total revenues and total costs. Total revenues, I'm simply going to take the quantity at equilibrium that's sold in the market by the firm times the average price they sell it for. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. So total revenues, price times quantity. That's easy. Total cost is a little more distant, but its definition still makes good sense. Again, Q, and it's going to be the same Q as I use over here, right? The quantity you sell is going to be equal to the quantity you produce. But what we're going to do is multiply that times the average total cost of production. So if you sell 100 units and it costs you on average $6 per unit to produce, 100 times 6 is $600. That'll be your total cost. That's how we're going to compute that. All right? Okay. Let's keep that in mind. You'll see that unfold as I get into the dynamics I've described very quickly. Now, before I finally get into the model of privy competition, let me talk about the assumptions that we make in order for this model to work. And let me harken back for a moment to the first day of class where I talked about the importance of economic models. When you develop an economic model or when you use an economic model, it's always extremely relevant to state what the model is based on, to state what assumptions the model is based on. Sometimes these assumptions, and as you'll see here, can be pretty unrealistic. But it's still important to state them because as you trace out how the model responds to different pressures, it's important to know what would happen if you eased some of these assumptions. And one at a time, ceteris paribus, you change one assumption, you hold the rest in ceteris paribus, you see what happens to the model's predictions or explanations. But it's important to know where you start from. It's always important to know what the model contains and what assumptions it makes before you can begin to assess the reality, the explanatory power, and the predictive power of the model. Now, some of these assumptions that we've gone through before, when I introduced supply and demand, I listed a bunch of assumptions you have to make in order for the model of supply and demand to work. Some of those are going to be repeated here, then I'm going to add one to it. So, first of all companies, all firms in the industry, we're going to talk about this by industry. All firms in the industry are price takers with a T. A price taker, what that means is that firms have no power over their price. The price is dictated to them at the industry or market level. They can't do anything to change that price. All they can do is decide how much to sell into that market at that particular price. And this is kind of profound because think about a situation. Picture a supply and demand curve for an industry. And now picture an individual company in the industry who takes all of their inventory and dumps it onto the market. Now, normally, what would you see? I mean, the obvious implication of that is that if a company dumps all of its inventory on the market, that's going to be reflected in the model as an increase in supply, which would lower the price and raise the quantity sold in the market. What I'm saying is that this isn't the way it works. That each company is such a small, infinitesimally small part of the market that even if they dump their entire inventory onto the market, you can kind of think of it as they're within the width of the supply curve chalk line. That's how small they are. And same with withdrawing from the market. If they totally withdraw from the market, they pull all of their potential sales out of the market and not sell it if it's a service, stock it in inventory if it's a product, normally you would think that that would lower the supply curve in this up to the left direction, raise the price, lower the quantity sold at market clearing quantity and price. But these firms are all so small, so infinitesimally small, that nothing they can do can change the price. Beryl, did you have a question?
Yeah.
You want to share it?
So I can't wrap my mind around this concept. Like,
Because it's so abstract, it's kind of silly.
I know.
Except when you drive across the country, driving from the East Coast to Denver, when you hit, you're driving Interstate 70, and when you hit Kansas, parts of Missouri, but when you hit Kansas, the only radio stations available to you in the morning are radio stations that quote agricultural prices. So you hear the price of corn, you hear the price of wheat per bushel, you hear the price of pork bellies. I mean, and it's I listen to this stuff and just go nuts, but all you hear are these prices. Well, what that's telling you is that farmers can't affect those prices. Those are the prices today, no matter what happens to supply. No matter how many farmers take their wheat to market or corn to market or pork bellies to market or anything, that's the price that obtains. So agriculture is an industry for the small farmer where no matter, they could completely withdraw their inventory from the market that day. Wouldn't affect that price. They could sell everything they got. Wouldn't affect that price.
Who sets the price then?
Well, that's always a question in markets, isn't it? Who sets the price? Let me answer the question. Nobody really knows that as an economist. How do prices get set? Is there a kind of a process of discovery? Some investment bankers make their money by figuring out what the first price of a public offering ought to be. This is not an easy thing. Now, what happens, of course, I think statistically, is there's what's called a distributed lag. What happens is the price today is a function of the price yesterday, the day before that, the day before that. Revised based on current information. So there's in statistics, in regression, that's called a distributed lag. You're lagging the time frame, and you're accumulating that lagged information to tell you what's happening today. So that's a very incomplete, not satisfactory answer to your question. But I tell you, economists, this has been a question in economics for over a century, and economists to this day still struggle with the question. Let's see, I think yes, Sean.
I was just going to ask, in like a federally regulated market like milk, what happens? Milk and dairy products.
Well, with regulation, what happens is that I think in milk they said a minimum price, not a max. Is that right?
I think there's a minimum, exactly.
Okay, let's just say there's a minimum.
Because it's subsidized by the government, so there's actually an oversupply of the product.
Right. So what that would mean would be, the price would be set here. The market clearing price is here. Here's the regulated price. So that's going to decrease demand and increase supply unless they take the subsidy and have farmers reduce the price back down to the market clearing price. It's unclear how it works, but this is the basic implication. What you're asking is what happens if the government interferes in the marketplace? Does this still obtain? I would say that it does, but you can't see this clearly because there is this regulation being imposed on top of it. Okay? Yeah, Andrew. I'm getting to you. Okay, I'm getting to you.
Let me just comment on the idea of how to think about this, but isn't the fact that firms are price takers why cartels exist? Isn't that?
Oh, absolutely.
Isn't that why, for example, OPEC countries?
It's why cartels exist. It's why price fixing exists. It's why this model of price leadership, where one company raises their price or lowers it, like the airlines, they always wait to see who's going to do it first. And a lot of times what happens is a price leader kind of emerges from the crowd, and everybody who runs a company looks to see what that price leader is going to do. And they are price makers, but they got to kind of wait and see how the market's going to sort out. And that's basically what they're trying to replicate is the cartel arrangement. We'll actually talk about that. Yeah, okay.
So this would work only.
Okay, yeah. No, go ahead. You're good.
So this would work only in like a perfect competition, not in a monopolist.
Correct.
market.
Correct. Anytime, and that's why this is sort of a razor's edge abstraction. Because as soon as you say that a firm has some kind of power over their price, then you're not in perfect competition anymore. And one thing that's going to happen is, first of all, perfect competition doesn't exist. So why the hell should I study it? Well, you should study it so that you can compare any actual market structure that exists in the real world. You can compare it to the outcome of perfect competition, and it gives you a sense of how you need to alter what you think how markets work based on the comparison with the perfect competition model. Yeah, okay.
So I feel like you're going to help me figure out this movie that I've never fully understood called.
That, I've thought about getting into being a movie critic
Yeah.
professionally, but I think I have the same chance of that as being a marriage counselor. Reasons I don't need to review now.
Let's start. So Trading Places, right?
Trading Places.
Eddie Murphy film, which is highly recommended. But a big part of the premise for anyone who's seen it is this idea of like the price of orange juice. Have you seen this movie?
I have, but it's been years.
Okay. Do you remember?
By the way, she's asking me if I've seen the movie Trading Places. And I want to confirm to the folks watching online that we are totally off the rails on this class. Just so you know, this was not my plan for today.
It is because the whole thing is like, what is the price of orange juice
Right.
going to be?
Right.
And there's some deal with the agriculture man, and I won't spoil the ending, but like, what is in that document that all of us, like, why does
Nope.
that document tell us what?
I have no idea. But let me talk about oranges. You know, one of the things we're going to discover as I go through these assumptions is most of them feed back to this. Most of them are elaborations of why it is that companies have no pricing power. One of the examples of this is agricultural products, and one of the examples of how agricultural products work is oranges. Now, basically, an orange is an orange, right? But literally millions of dollars have been expended by both Florida orange growers and California orange growers to convince the buying public that it matters where your orange comes from. That if you're buying an orange, you better buy a Florida orange or you're not going to get the best orange. Same thing with a California orange. Now, what does that kind of distinction in a consumer's mind do? It gives the producers of Florida oranges some pricing power. And what I've noticed on advertising is when you buy orange juice, they make a point of saying, from Florida oranges. Well, suddenly, a Florida orange is distinct from all other oranges in the galaxy. And potentially that gives growers and sellers of Florida oranges some pricing power. If people believe Florida oranges are better than all other oranges, they'd be going to do what? Pay a higher price for Florida oranges. So there is a key to understanding how important this assumption is and what its violation looks like. And of course, what do you want to do as soon as you're a company? You want to violate this as quick as you can. This is not a model that companies want to have applied to them. Okay? Number two. Oh, yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Kate.
For companies that are leaders in their industry, meaning they're the first firm in a particular industry, do they occupy a space of perfect competition or monopoly or
No, it's something I would call them. It depends. The question is for companies who are first movers. You know, it's not a. There's not. That's a case. I have to answer case by case. But in general, a first mover in an industry, by definition, is in an industry. They can dominate the industry by being the first mover. They can experience economies of scale because they're a first mover. By definition, that violates this.
Yeah,
The first mover always has some power over their price because they're there first. So that they're a monopoly as they start.
Right.
Now, it may happen, it does happen oftentimes, that a first mover is followed by other competitors. But at first, and maybe thereafter for a long time, they're not price takers, they have pricing power. So right away you violate this. I tell you, in all these assumptions, you're going to see that right away they can be violated in the real world. Number two, the product or service is homogeneous. The converse of homogeneous is heterogeneous. Homogeneous just means if you take the product's easiest to describe this, but service is the same thing, same concept. Like take an orange. Put an orange from every farm in the United States, Florida, California, are those the only two places basically that grow oranges? That would make Alaska third in orange production, wouldn't it?
Hawaii.
Hawaii, you think Hawaii produces oranges? Could be. Anyway, but put every orange from every farm side by side, you couldn't tell the difference. The product is completely homogeneous. Same with the service. How do gas stations differ now? They used to differ in the level of service they offered. I still remember when I would drive into a gas station and a bunch of people would run up to my car and clean my windows and ask me what I wanted to serve and pump the gas for me and check my oil. What's happened is that gas stations have become homogeneous. You can't tell one from the other. The only way you can tell one from the other is geography. Is the gas station a right-hand turn from how you're traveling? That's it. And you notice this feeds back into this and gets back into our discussion of Florida versus California oranges. If all products are homogeneous, that removes one possible way of firms being price makers, being able to have some pricing power. Number 3, there is reasonable ease of entry or exit to and from the industry. So, one of the important parts of the dynamic I'm going to sketch out is that when firms in an industry are making profits above normal profits above opportunity cost, because of another assumption I'm going to outline here, everybody's going to know about it. And they're going to know about it instantly. Now, if players in an economy are all out to maximize, and we know from my first song in the musical I'm writing that everybody's out to maximize, what they're going to try and do is liquidate from where they are, if they're not making what they consider to be reasonable profits, and they're going to move their resources into this industry where excess profits are being made. Well, to be able to fulfill that, and by the way, notice what this does to this price taker business. If a firm is making an excess profit, and there are so few firms in the industry that they begin to develop some pricing power, well, what this tells you is that potential competitors can move in pretty damn quick. Now, it doesn't say it's free entry or free exit. It's not like building an integrated steel mill. It's more like renting a restaurant space. So it's not free entry, but it's ease of entry. Exit as well. The whole dynamic depends on the ability of resources that are in a particular industry that's not doing well, that you can liquidate those resources and move them to another industry. Well, that has to do with exit from an industry. How easy is it to liquidate your assets? And of course, that's again a case-by-case deal. If your asset is physical plant and equipment in a building, and that building is full of asbestos and lead paint, that's going to be tough to liquidate. On the other hand, if you have something that's a whole lot more mobile, a resource a whole lot more mobile, if your main resource is the brain power of your employees, and they can either do kind of internet sales or, streaming, then that's easy to liquidate and move fairly quickly. And once again, that controls this. Having competitors always ready to move and take advantage of excess profit really reduces the ability of individual firms to have any pricing power for any length of time. Number 4. Information. Information is perfect. Information in perfect competition is itself perfect. And there are 2 dimensions to perfection. Number one, all information is available to everybody, to all players in the economy. And number two, that information is available immediately. As soon as the information is generated, it's available to everybody. All right? You know, and this has a couple of things. When does a firm know it should leave an industry and enter another one? Well, it knows what the profit situation is in those industries. Now, sometimes, if the companies are publicly traded, they will know this as a matter of course. Sometimes not so much. Entry into an industry, reasonable ease of entry into an industry, assumes that there are no copyright or patent infringement possibilities. That information on technologies that are specific to an industry are available to everybody. And notice, as soon as you've got patents or copyrights, that isn't true anymore. So patents or copyrights are a way of creating pricing power and removing this particular assumption, violating it. That doesn't mean that patents or copyrights are bad, but it does mean that there's a downside to patents and copyrights. It reduces competition. And by reducing it, of course, it rewards the inventor, the developer of the technology or the idea, which is a good thing because it incentivizes others to do the same. Number 5, finally, no economies of scale. So, Caitlin, first movers wouldn't happen in the way that we were talking about because we assume there are no economies of scale. Now this is a different, by the way, if you read your textbook, they don't have this, they have some of the same, but they don't have this exhaustive list. This is my list. Okay, so how does this work? How do we apply these assumptions and some of the ideas I've created about market structure to talk about perfect competition? So here's the model of perfect competition. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a two-paneled model. So, you know, when you're drawing your graphs, wait till you see what I'm going to do so you'll know you have enough space, mostly horizontal space. What I'm going to first do is I'm going to identify what's happening at the industry level, which is basically the entire market for the product or service. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to identify within the setting established at the industry level, however that happens, I'm going to see what happens to the typical firm in the industry. All right, let's go here. At the industry level, we're going to assume that the market clearing price and the market clearing quantity are established through the interaction of supply and demand. Gosh, what a surprise. So there's demand at the industry level. There's supply at the industry level. Here's the market clearing price, MC, and here's the market clearing quantity, MC. Okay, now, typical firm. What price does the firm charge? Has to charge the market clearing price established at the industry level, doesn't it? Once that price is established, firms are all price takers. They can't do anything about it. Now, how it gets translated to the firms is an interesting issue. Not all firms are driving across Kansas and getting, corn prices read off to them. But this happens. It happens in a pretty efficient, well-oiled way in economies. And what I'm saying happens graphically is this market clearing price gets transmitted to the company, to the typical firm. So now the typical firm can sell as much of this product as it wants at the price that's market clearing for the industry. So by the way, what does the demand curve look like to the owner of the typical firm? And the answer is that the typical firm, because it's so tiny, because it can't affect the price no matter what it does, can sell as much or as little as it wants, as long as it adheres to the market clearing price established at the industry. So the demand curve to the typical firm is this kind of strange configuration. It's a completely horizontal demand curve. And notice what this means. The firm could sell as high a quantity as its capacity will let it, or as small a quantity as it wants, or zero. And it doesn't affect the market clearing price. Okay? Now, in this configuration, let's say the price is $5 per unit. That means every unit of sale brings in $5 to the company. Well, that's how you define marginal revenue, isn't it? So in this particular case, and I'll change this when we get to other market structures. In this particular case, the price is exactly the same as the marginal revenue. They are the same thing. Oh, Daniel, have you missed a hell of a class? You can see how excited everybody is, right? You can just tell, yeah. Go ahead, just laugh it up there. Now, how does this firm decide it's going to maximize its profits? Well, first of all, it's going to maximize its profits because they're all maximizers. And what we just determined earlier was that any firm in any market structure, by the way, this rule of thumb is not dependent on what market structure. This is a rule of thumb that covers all firms in all industry structures. A firm is going to maximize its profits if it sets the production level such that marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So what we need is some more information here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside this firm's set of cost functions. Remember, every firm has a set of cost functions. Total costs, total fixed cost, average total cost, average variable cost, marginal cost. Marginal cost is available to us because we have all the information we need to know about these companies. So I'm going to pull the marginal cost function for this company out from the graph of those costs, and I'm going to impose it on this graph. And remember, the marginal cost is kind of a bowl shape. It falls and then rises. If you go back to the table I put up here a few sessions ago, you'll recall the marginal cost as you moved down to higher and higher levels of production would fall at first. And this is due to diminishing marginal product. At first, marginal cost falls, and then ultimately it rises because the firm experiences diminishing marginal product. And of course, the whole setting here is short run. So this firm is capacity constrained. It can't increase or decrease its capacity because this is a short run analysis. So marginal cost equals marginal revenue right here. All right? So the quantity this firm produces is Q sub F. Now, by the way, back to Q market clearing. The market clearing, for Q market clearing to be market clearing, it has to be precisely the sum of all the individual firms in the industry, their Q sub F. So Q market clearing has to equal the sum of all the QFs in the industry. And if firms produce too much in the aggregate, that will push the supply curve this way, and it'll put downward pressure on the price. If firms produce too little, it'll put upward pressure on the price. So there has to be this magical mechanism which coordinates what each firm makes to what the market clearing quantity is at the industry level. And there's probably an iterative process to the extent that it exists at all. Okay? Now, let me start anew with another graph. What I want to do is I want to describe what happens. Let's start out with a company, a typical firm, that's making profits above its opportunity cost, making profits above a normal profit. And let's see what the dynamics are in in an industry like that. So again, I'm going to identify the industry. I'm going to identify a typical firm. And I'm just going to replicate what's over there. I heard you yawn. I heard the yawn. Okay, that's just what's over here. But now let's figure out how much profit this firm is making, if any. If anything above normal or opportunity cost. And the way we do that, recall, is that we compare total revenues generated by sales of this product to the total cost incurred by making it. And the way we measure total revenue is we take price times quantity. In this case, it will be the quantity of the firm. And the way we determine total cost is average total cost times quantity. Again, the quantity the firm makes. So the quantity is this quantity. And now what I have to do is take the average total cost function from the family of cost functions for this firm and impose it on this graph as well. Well, let's just say this is the way it looks. There's average total cost. Now, bear with me. At Q sub F, at a price of market clearing price, what's the total revenue of this company geometrically? Well, it's the rectangle defined by from the market clearing price to here to the firm's quantity of production back to the origin, back up. It's that rectangle. Because I'm multiplying price times quantity. What's their cost? Well, they're producing, I'm sorry, I'm right in your way, aren't I?
It's okay.
All right, better be. Because I can't write left-handed.
I didn't ask you.
All right, no, you did. I do have to grade your exams in this class, just so you recall, just so you remember.
Do you know my name?
There's the average total cost that the firm incurs to produce this product. So their total costs are from here to average total cost over to quantity of F down to there. It's this rectangle. Their revenues are this rectangle. Where do their excess? Are they earning profits above normal profits? Remember, if they're paying their costs, they're earning a normal profit. They're covering opportunity costs. Are they earning more than that right now? Yes, they are. They're earning an excess profit. I didn't draw that well. They're earning an excess profit that I've shaded in. Okay? That graph is ugly, but you kind of get the point. Now, what happens in this industry? First of all, who knows that there are excess profits being earned in this industry? Everybody. Whether they're in the industry or not. How quickly do they know? They know immediately. If firms want to leave what they're doing now because they're not making an excess profit or even normal profits, how easy is it for them to exit their industry? It's pretty easy. Is it easy for them to enter this industry? Are there any patents or copyrights or sort of trade secrets they have to get to know? No. Information is ubiquitous. Entry is easy. So companies can immediately, pretty much immediately. Now, immediately means it's still constricted by the short run. Remember, the company has to build capacity. How long does it take? It takes the short run. So there's going to be some passage of time before new companies can enter and actually be operational. And as soon as they're operational, what's going to happen to the supply function for the industry? It's going to shift down like that. It's going to increase. As the supply function increases, think of it going off like that. What's going to happen to the equilibrium price or the market clearing price? It's going to fall. Well, what was generating these excess profits here? They were generated because the selling price of the product that was market clearing exceeded the average cost of production. As the price falls, it squeezes these profits out. What's the logical end of this process? Profits have to be totally squeezed out so that all that's left are normal profits. In other words, if you're exactly paying off your cost of production, no excess profits are being earned, no losses are being earned. That's the ultimate end of this. Now, there might be some iteration around that. There might be an oversupply of companies and the price will go down too far. Some firms will be making losses. They'd have to leave the industry. That takes more time. We're going to assume this all happens in one move. And the move is that price falls, this price line falls, in so doing it squeezes out all the profits. Now let me show you once again how that looks. That's the first price. Here's the second price after the increase in companies. Excess profit has lured companies in because they're all maximizers. They can get in, they can get out and get in. You know that. So I'm not going to draw the marginal cost in here. What had been a situation of excess profits incites an entry of new firms into the market, increasing supply, depressing price. The price goes down, and the only situation that's stable, that doesn't either encourage more firms to come in or the exit of existing firms, is a price that hits the very minimum of the average total cost function. Now, geometrically, and it turns out theoretically, you can't establish a price other than one that hits the minimum point of the average total cost function that doesn't either encourage new firms to come in or existing firms to exit. If the price is above that level, that means that the costs are lower than the price, firms come in. Increased supply lowers the price. If the price is lower than that level, firms are earning losses, firms leave, supply moves up that way, price goes up. So that one of the real intellectually appealing aspects of the model of perfect competition is that a couple things. First of all, the price, the market clearing price of the product exactly equals the cost of producing it. I mean, how many times have you been in a restaurant where you get the bill, and you look at the bill, and you say, man, I could have produced this meal for 1/5 the cost. What the hell am I doing here? Well, that's a common phenomenon. It may be unrealistic, but it's a common phenomenon of the impact of the price, this market clearing, differing wildly from the cost of production. And you certainly have a sense of that when you buy stuff. Is the price they're asking, in any way can you imagine that it costs that much to produce the product? Well, what the model of perfect competition says is that the selling price of the product is in equilibrium, in long-run equilibrium, is in fact going to equal the price of the cost of producing the product. That's a nice intellectual, philosophical outcome. But it says something further. It says not only is the price going to be equal to the cost of production, but every firm is going to be forced to produce at the lowest cost they can possibly produce at, and therefore offer the product at the lowest possible price. That's the second sort of intellectually, philosophically appealing aspect of this. Sir?
Is this completely inane, or what would happen if you threw nonprofits into this model?
Inane is not a word I would use for nonprofits and how they fit into this model. But what I would ask you is there an equivalent of a price being generated for a nonprofit?
It depends on the
And it depends, doesn't it?
nonprofit.
For this whole thing to work, there has to be a market that's organized in some way for the exchange of this product in the market, product or service. A nonprofit, by its very nature, may not be involved in a marketplace. There may not be a market clearing price generated at all, in which case this becomes that we don't have the tools here to examine that. Now, if a nonprofit, co-ops, agricultural co-ops are a form of nonprofit organization, and they do go into markets to generate market clearing prices. So you could use this in some instances, in some cases, depending on a case-by-case basis what the nonprofit does, and does it enter into a market, and is there a price being generated? But unless there is, you can't use this. Questions or comments about this? Do you think this is a realistic model? Of course not. What do we have to begin to alter to make this more realistic? Well, everything. Are there economies of scale? Sometimes there are. What would that do to this model? Is information closely held? Are there trade secrets? Are there patents? How would that affect this model? Is entry or exit less than easy? Is it hard to liquidate resources? Is it difficult to get those resources into a new industry? Do you have to prove yourself? By the way, something I haven't already talked about. When you're in a marketplace as a customer, you depend on reputation, don't you, when you buy something? Is the store reputable? Is the product reputable? What happens to that in perfect competition? It's irrelevant, isn't it? Because customers can't tell the products or services apart. They don't know who makes what. It's all homogeneous. So there is no reputational effect in perfect competition. Everybody's on an equal footing from the first day and forevermore. Well, that's not realistic, is it? Our products. What's the first thing you want to do when you run a business? You want to distinguish your product from everybody else, don't you? You want to be different. That violates number 2, where all products are homogeneous. Products or services are homogeneous. We don't believe that's true, but now we can actually trace out the effects when it isn't true. Because the first thing you want to do, you never want to be in this situation. Nobody here, I will deny you your MBA degree. If you contend to me that you want to be in a company that operates in a perfectly competitive market, because they are brutal for companies that are operating in, and of course there's no such thing as perfect competition, but there are industries that are close enough where these kind of dynamics in sort of modified form operate. And of course it all gets back to pricing power. And everything gets back to pricing power. What kind of power does the individual company have to set its price, presumably above their cost? Well, all the assumptions that go into that, 2, 3, 4, and 5, foreclose that possibility. But of course, we know that firms do have individual pricing power. But it's on a continuum, isn't it? I mean, some firms have a lot of pricing power, some firms have a little bit, and what does it matter whether they have a little bit or a lot? Well, what it does basically is it moves them along that spectrum of market structure toward monopoly. I will talk often for the rest of this part of the course about monopoly power. And I'm not necessarily referring to monopolies per se where there's only one firm in the industry. I don't think they exist. But monopoly power just means companies have power over their price setting. And as soon as you need a perfect competition model, individual firms have some control of their price, have some pricing power, have some market power. And I'm going to oftentimes refer to it as monopoly power, even though they may well not be monopolists. Because I don't think there are any pure monopolists in our economy. So that's it. Have a good week. Have a good weekend. I'll see you Monday.